Hey everybody, how's it going? This is going to be video number 2 on my 2010 NC Miata engine swap series. This series has been really fun to film and I'm getting more content than I thought I would, so I'm really excited to share that with you all. In this video, it's just another video prepping for the removal of the subframe, engine, and transmission. I take apart part of the center console and the shifter linkage, as well as some things in the engine bay, power steering, brakes. I'm really excited to share with you guys, and keep a lookout for videos every Tuesday, Thursday moving forward. And with that, let's get into this video. So first thing on today's agenda is taking apart the center console so that I could access the shifter so that it frees up space to drop the transmission so it's not in the way when we get to that. So to start off, you remove the rear part of the center console, and that gives access to a couple screws that you undo, and that loosens the center console freely. So what you want to do next is put the emergency brake in the up position so that you could access underneath the center console, because you need to get two connectors that are attached to the window switches. So you see me really yank the e-brake in the up position, and once I finally get those two connectors off, that's it, and you can remove the center console, which gives you easier access to the shifter boot and the shift lever. So there's 4 nuts that hold the shift boot in place, and once you remove those, there's one plastic clasp that holds down too. So you take a pair of vice grips or another pair of pliers and you pull it out. It's very simple. And then once you're done with that, you should be able to pull the shift boot out, which gives you complete access to the shifting mechanism. Then to get that out is 3 bolts that go that you have to remove from the top. And before I begin that, you see that I'm putting those 4 nuts back. As always, I think I'm gonna go nuts, haha, telling you guys to keep on putting the nuts back where you come from, because in this case, it's been 2 or 3 weeks since I've done this, so I need to know where those nuts are instead of looking around for them. And now when I go back to it, I know they're gonna be right there. So you saw me remove the 3 bolts and took the shifter out. Next is the brakes, because since we're going to be removing the subframe, the brake calipers are attached to the brake system, so that's staying in the car. So very simply, you remove the 2 bolts that are on the back of the brake caliper, and that frees it up and you pull it off. And I have a zip tie already ready to hang the caliper so that it's out of the way when we remove the subframe, so it's not just hanging, because that's really bad for the wires to have it like that. So here's another example from the other end. It's just those 2 simple bolts, and make sure not to forget to remove the cable from the A-arm to the suspension, because that's going to get in the way. So next, I'm starting to remove the undo the suspension from the subframe to the chassis. All it is a simple nut on a bolt. I showed you the front side, and then now this is the back side. And once you get that done, it's free to go. So you just hit it with a hammer to get it partially through, and then you could use a pick or a chisel, put it in the hole and just hit that bolt out, as you see me doing here. Very simple. It might get a little stuck, so my best tip is to use a jack stand or a floor jack or something to hold the suspension a little bit in the up position so it's not completely drooped, and that should give you the ability to take out those bolts a little easier. So next on the list is taking out the power steering, which is very simple. I took out the belt because the book told me to, and that was before I realized that the donor motor has a power steering pump, so I don't need to take the power steering pump off of my car, which makes everything a lot easier for the removal process. And actually going forward, I wouldn't recommend taking anything off the engine until after the engine is out of the car. It just makes everything easier to do it when it's out of the car instead of in the car like this. So what I'm doing here is removing some of the wires that feed power steering fluid to the power steering pump. I removed the first line that goes on top, and then this is the line that goes to the power steering reservoir. It was leaking, so I put a little rag over it, and then I removed the fluid from inside using the Vacuolo, which is a vacuum pump that sucks fluids out. It's really useful if you have an air compressor. I'd really recommend buying one for any like brakes, clutch, if it's not a brake and a clutch that share a system, power steering. It's just so useful. So once I do that and it's drained, I could remove it without worrying about spilling power steering fluid everywhere. So I remove the top hose, and then that gives me, and then I remove the 3 or 4 nuts that are holding the power steering reservoir into the chassis. And once those are out, you could pull the reservoir out a little, which makes it easier to adjust the reservoir off. You see me jiggling it there a little and trying to free it from the hose, and then once I get some leverage on it, it came out. But our friend Reyes came over and we started talking, so I didn't get it. So this is the final hose that I'm going to remove from the top before I raise the car onto the lift and do everything from below. And that is the hose that connects the power steering reservoir to the power steering cooler or radiator that is on the front of the radiator. So once I remove that, it will make it so there's no interference removing stuff later on from below. And with that, I raise the car and begin to prepare to drain the transmission fluid. Now, this isn't something that I don't think is necessary, but the book recommended it, and just to be on the safe side, I decided to do it. Even though this was completely new transmission fluid that only had like 113 miles on it or something, but that's all right, we'll refill it. So what you do is you remove the filler plug first, which is the higher plug on the transmission, and then after you remove the drain plug, which is the lower plug, and you do it in that order. And the reason you do it in that order is because it gives ventilation to allow all the fluid to leak out. So now I'm moving on to one of the coolers. I believe this is for the power steering, like we mentioned earlier. This was the front side of that hose that I removed. So what I do here is I remove another hose that's connected to the engine, or it's part of that engine assembly that's going to be coming out of the car. So what I tried doing is twisting it a little so that it breaks the seal, and then from the back you kind of walk it or push it off. And it was leaking a bit, so my dad came over with the oil catch can, and that freed it up to remove. There was a couple bolts on the front, and then there's that one bolt that you see on the side that I am pointing to there. So you remove that and it freely removes. Very simple. And of course, as always, putting the bolt back. And so now we're moving on to removing the radiator. So we're going to start with the AC cooler. So what you do here is remove part of the bracket that's underneath the left side of the radiator. After that, we brought the car back down and removed some of the coolant hoses that are connected to the radiator on the fan side. So as you can see here, my dad's giving a little tutorial about how to remove that clasp. And once you do that, it frees up all those hoses, which frees up the radiator. So that clasp is typically together. And so what you do is you push both sides up, and that releases the teeth and allows you to pull it open, as you see here. Great, so once you've done all that, it's just a couple more things to remove, and then you're ready to take off the AC cooler. So you take off a couple of those bolts that connect the piping to the cooler, and then once that's set, there's 2 on the side and then there's that 1 on the bottom. You kind of slide the thing up because it's on these clasps that connect to the radiator. So you kind of just push up and pull out, and it would be easier to do off the car, but you see me doing it here by taking it off from one side first and then getting the leverage on the other, so that you're not like just entirely pushing up on the whole thing, because you're just going to get into the front subframe. Alright, so that cooler got removed, and now you get to watch my dad and I struggle to take some components for the radiator off. The radiator is connected. There's a couple of cables that are connected through the radiator, held on by the radiator. So you got to remove those first, and then once you're done with that, the radiator's free to go. It's not really connected in a traditional way. It's just kind of held in by the bottom. So you see there, my dad was trying to remove it from the top, but it's easier to put it at a little bit above eye line and then take it out from below. And as you see right there, super easy, came off with the fans. I would recommend taking it off with the fans. It's a lot easier than trying to take the fans off inside the car and then taking the radiator off. And so once that's done, we take apart the brackets that are holding the radiator in. Like I said, it's not really bolted in per se, it's more held in by those brackets and then the brackets on top. And of course, as always, I put the bolts back because it's gonna be a minute before I do this project again, and I wanna know where they are. So next is the ABS sensors, because again, the subframe is going to come off the car and the ABS sensors are connected to the chassis. So these need to come off so that we don't tear them on the process. So it's really simple. You take you take off the bolt that's connecting it to the car, and then you take off another bolt that's connecting it into the hub. And once that's done, it gets to hang. And I am going to point to where it is, and I'll have a little arrow showing you where it is on the hub in a minute here too. But as always, use some zip ties to hold it up, because if you put the subframe back in like I do in a couple videos from now, you don't want those ABS sensors just dragging across the floor while you're pushing a roller shell. So it's a very simple job to just take those sensors off, but be careful with them because they are delicate. And so that's the end of my second video. Here I am putting all the tools away, because nothing is more frustrating than looking for tools and wasting your time. And that's that. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check on the channel every Tuesday and Thursday.